I feel like we're in the Brady Bunch.
Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Valentine. I'm the director of DSF Discover. We are here with Disciples Peace Fellowship staff and executive board. Hello to everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. First, I want to make sure that everyone can hear me. So if you can hear me, please type in, just like Jensuk did, your name, where you are watching from, so we can just do a sound test, make sure that everything is good to go. And I'll type that in as well. Hi, Mary. I see other people too. And I had set a sticky message and it disappeared, so let me reset it. Okay, here we go. Okay, it looks like great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for that sound test. Great. So it looks like people can see and hear us. So I think we're ready to go. Perfect. So again, welcome to everyone. Again, I'm Katie Valentine with DSF Discover, and we're really happy to bring you this really special training and informational about a resolution that is coming up for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ at our upcoming General Assembly later on this month in Des Moines, Iowa. So this webinar is pretty disciple specific, but if you happen not to be a member of the Disciples of Christ, you're welcome. You're going to find out tons of great information. So that is not a barrier at all. Just be patient with this as we use kind of insider lingo. So let me just go around and have everyone introduce themselves, and I'll begin with Brian. Thank you. And Rebecca. Oh, we can't hear you, Rebecca.
I am muted. I am no longer muted. I'm Rebecca Littlejohn. I am the pastor of Vista La Mesa Christian Church in La Mesa, California, which is in East San Diego County. And I am just finishing up my 8th year on the executive committee for Disciples Peace Fellowship.
Awesome. So glad you're here. And Chrissy.
Hi, all. I am Chrissy Stonebraker-Martinez from Cleveland, Ohio. I work full-time as the co-director of the Interreligious Task Force on Central America, and I am honored and overwhelmed to be the co-moderator of DPF.
Awesome. And Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen Walling. I am in Washington, D.C. I work for an organization called Vital Voices Global Partnership that supports women leaders around the world. Specifically, I work on an anti-gender-based violence program. And I've lost track of how many years I've been on the executive committee with Disciples Peace Fellowship, but I was an intern in 2009. And it's been at least 3 or 4 years since I've been working with the committee.
Okay, thank you. I think Brian will be back. There he is. Sometimes that happens. And we wanted to do a sound check on Brian anyhow, because some people said they couldn't hear him. So we'll try that again. Welcome back, Brian.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I just reset my screen.
Okay.
Let's see if that helps.
Okay. Let me ask people if they can hear you now. We can all hear Brian just fine. So it's curious. The ways of the internet are curious sometimes. So we'll wait for a response. So Brian, do you have a song or something you'd like to sing as we test your?
Oh, good.
Okay.
I see from Linda and Mary, they can hear me.
Okay.
So let me introduce myself again
Great.
then. Thank you, friends, for passing that word along that you couldn't hear me. It would have been embarrassing to be mouthing along all night to you. I'm Brian Frederick-Gray, and I am the mission director for Disciples Peace Fellowship, and I'm based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Perfect. Well, let's just go ahead and get started and jump right into this topic. People have been emailing me. They're excited. I'm excited. And we are all eager to learn more. So we've kind of built this as like five ways to understand and promote peacemaking. And one way we can do that is to vote for it. So people who are attending General Assembly can actually vote for this resolution. So we would love to learn a little bit more about the resolution and why it's important. And Rebecca, I'm hoping you'll just kick us off with that.
Yeah. Well, it had been growing in my heart for a number of years that the General Assembly had not spoken directly to the issues of women in a while. Over the last, 8-10 years, we've seen increasing attacks on reproductive rights in this country in ways that we've seen some very public hostility toward women in leadership in this country. And I kept thinking, who's gonna have the church say something about this? And so then this last year, one of the winners of the Nobel Peace Prize was Nadia Murad, who is a young woman. She's in her 20s. She was abducted by ISIS. She was part of the Yazidi community in Iraq, a very small religious minority. She was held for a number of months. She managed to escape, and she's become an international leader in women's rights and in fighting particularly against things like rape as a weapon of war. And so that all kind of came together, and it was like, it's time for the church to say something, not just about here, not just about there, but about that entire spectrum, because it's all connected. So it would be one thing for someone to bring a resolution to the assembly that is, focused on reproductive rights in this country, which are incredibly important, and that needs to be said. It would be another thing for somebody to talk about, a specific aspect of how women are victims of war in the rest of the world. But by bringing this through Disciples Peace Fellowship, we're able to connect all of those issues on the giant spectrum of ugliness on which they exist, and then point to the ways that women are doing peacemaking in ways that are fruitful and effective. And so it looks a little broad, this resolution. People look at it and well, what is it you're trying to say? We're saying all the things because they're all connected. The way we talk to our little girls in our churches is connected to the way little girls in Iraq are treated. And so that was, it was just time. And I think the thing that really struck me, I had the sense in the last 3 or 4 assemblies, gosh, we haven't said anything about that in a long time. And when I went back to look through, because one of the things you do when you construct a resolution is look at what the General Assembly has said about these issues before. And I had to go back embarrassingly far to find resolutions that spoke to these issues. 1989 was a really good year. I was still in high school. So it's not to say there hasn't been anything since then. 93 was a pretty good year, but literally the last time anything at all had been said was 2007, and it was kind of a watered down resolution about how we need to figure out how to talk about abortion with each other better because we don't all agree, which is not really what I was looking for. So this resolution is a long time coming, in my personal opinion. And that's part, I think, of why we felt like it needed to cover so much territory, but also just to connect all of that stuff together, because we often look at some of these issues in isolation and don't realize how the words we use in our congregations are directly affected to the policies our country is carrying out and the policies we're tolerating all over the world all the time.
Thank you. I think that gives us a really good idea of the sort of broad spectrum about like the state of the world. And then what is this resolution saying precisely, if we could summarize it, if people just haven't had the chance to read it quite yet?
Well, it's kind of hard to summarize because it covers so much. But basically it's, women are people. We should act like it. That might be a little too summarizing, but it goes through a number of the realities about the current state of women and non-binary individuals in the world, the violence that is both part of mundane life in America, but also part of war, part of all the various conflicts going on in the world. We talk about economic disparities. One of the things that was also a little bit frustrating in putting it together was that we found it impossible to get good current statistics about the compensation of disciples clergy. Those statistics are not being kept anywhere anyhow right now. So we don't know. I mean, I wanted to say, you know, is there a wage gap, a pay gap for disciples clergy based on gender? And I'm fairly certain there is, but no one has the numbers to illustrate just how bad it is, which was very interesting to me. So I'm hoping that's something eventually that we can also help fix so that we have a better sense of the scope of the problem.
Cool. Thank you. And we should all note that Chrissy is graciously joining us from camp, so she has some people making cameos in her video feed, which is great, promoting peacemaking among our youth, which is wonderful. Cool. Well, another way that we can promote peacemaking, we have voting, and the second way is to become educated. So we would just love to hear what happens when women are included in peacemaking efforts. And Kristen, I think you are our first speaker on this.
Yes. So we do specifically address this in the resolution, and I will be happy to follow up with more resources afterwards by email. But one of the things that shouldn't really be surprising, and yet it is in many ways, is that when women are brought into conversations early on in peacemaking efforts, that they have a lasting impact, that it is more likely to result in gender equality across the board, not specifically related to conflict resolution, but also in terms of other markers of gender equality. We see better economic equality in the aftermath of war and conflict and instability if women have been involved in that process. We see better outcomes for children because that is often rightly or wrongly kind of at the forefront of women's minds and conversation. And so I think the statistic is something like if women are part of a central part of the peacemaking process, that it's more than 30% likely that specific peace negotiation will have a lasting impact and remain in place for at least 15 years. And that's just a pretty startling number to me, even somebody who works on these issues day in and day out. And even though the purposes of the resolution, we didn't specifically look at some of those other issues, I think it would probably stand to reason that when women are involved in conversations, the conversation just looks different than those that are dominated primarily by men. And so if you're talking about a different question, then you're going to get a different answer. And I think inherently bringing women into that process means that you're talking about a different question a lot of the time. And we also wanted to be really intentional in this resolution about recognizing the spectrum of gender identity, and that although it is focused on women, we recognize that that includes cisgender and transgender women, and that there's kind of a growing recognition within our country and globally of populations that don't fall along very clear binaries of I am a man, I am a woman. And so similarly, bringing the full spectrum of human into the conversation, again, just means that you're going to be getting different perspectives and have a better ability to look holistically at both challenges and solutions.
Thank you. And I typed into our chat box, and I'll make it a little banner for us. That 30% number seems really important. 30% more lasting impact when women are involved from the get-go. So it's a really handy number for us all to keep in mind. Thank you so much. And part of this education, I think, is understanding the complexity of lives of women worldwide. And Rebecca alluded to this earlier. And I'm just wondering if anyone on the panel can speak to how this resolution may speak to those complexities. There's I'm hearing, I want to make sure I'm correct on this, I'm hearing that there's some similarity globally, even though women have really different lives globally, and these complexities play out in different ways. So what are some of those ways that we may be unaware of? We've heard the 30% number. Rebecca alluded to like clergy salary as another way. Is there anything else that's coming to mind that we should be aware of to kind of dive into this complexity? And I bet some of our viewers might also have some ideas, so feel free to type those into the chat box so we can all kind of build our awareness.
I think there are a couple of threads that go through this. There is this, there is the, I don't know, identity, the personhood of women being diminished is a thread that goes through, you know, from one end of extremity to just the like tiny little microaggressions that may happen in a congregation with a female pastor. But then the other thread that going through there, at least through most of it, is violence. And that's why, I mean, that's how this becomes an issue. No, well, it's not the only way. Disciples Peace Fellowship thinks women are people. We also really don't like violence, and like in any form. And so just recognizing that diminishment begets violence, and that happens at like every level along that spectrum. And, you know, people will say, well, what does this have to do with that? And, you know, oh, why does it matter if I always call God Father? Well, what are the little girls in your church hearing? What are the little boys in your church hearing when they do that? How does that affect how they then care about women in Afghanistan? It's shaping at a very subconscious level their understanding of the world and their sense of responsibility for all God's people, and whether they're worth their time or not. So part of it is, I think, just understanding how powerful some of the little things that happen. You know, people often accuse women of making a big deal out of something that shouldn't be a big deal. You should just let it go. You know, why are you so uptight? You just are looking for things to be offended about. Well, these things shape our world. So yeah, it does matter. And, you know, those of us who are only dealing with microaggressions need to be able to connect those small ways, those small forms of violence, to the larger forms of violence so that all of it gets taken seriously.
Thank you. On that note, I'm going to just post a link in the chat box because there's another resolution at General Assembly about awareness and education and reduction of domestic and intimate partner violence. And we are having a webinar about that in 3 days. So I'm just posting the link if anyone hasn't signed up for that, and all part of this complexity.
Just to add onto that, I had said earlier this resolution was a long time coming. We had down here in District 8, the San Diego area disciples had a workshop yesterday for folks from all of our churches, whether they're going to General Assembly or not, to learn about some of the resolutions. And what I was noticing there is that this resolution, along with the one about domestic violence, along with the one about learning about transgender people and identities, I feel like there is, you know, and we were almost told, well, there's all these things about the same thing. I mean, and obviously they're not all the same, but they are connected. And I think it's been growing and growing, and the moment has come, and it's like, we got to talk about this stuff. People are dying. And so it's coming from all these different directions. I think it's really interesting to me because, you know, none of us were really having those conversations ahead of time about, well, maybe we should do this. It wasn't strategy. This was the Spirit, as far as I'm concerned. Spirit is saying it's long past time to have these conversations.
Awesome. Yeah, and this is, I want to affirm everyone who's watching this, because this is one way that you are participating, and we're going to have a few more concrete ways towards the end of the hour too, about how you can continue to participate in peacemaking in your life and in your communities. One of the things that I'm really excited about at General Assembly is that DPF will be collecting, or has been collecting stories, we'll be sharing them about women peacemakers from all over the world. And we would love a little preview about some of the stories that have captured all of you. I'm just wondering if all the panelists could share some of your favorites.
Yeah, and I want to say that the importance of storytelling is really about the importance of changing hearts and minds. And as we change hearts and minds, we change attitudes and behaviors. And then when we do that, we can hopefully change policies to make a greater impact, though we know that politicians won't save us because there's been a lot of violence against women through our structural policies, right? And people often have a hard time understanding those systemic issues of oppression when there's not a face and a story behind it. So if I can give you a little bit of background really quickly, I work primarily on issues of human rights in Central America and Colombia, and that requires that I also support immigrant rights and defense in the United States as a reaction to addressing the root causes of migration in Central America and Colombia through U.S. foreign policy. And so in that specific area of the world, right, if we're looking at Honduras or we're looking at El Salvador, we have some of the most violent places in the world for women simply because they're women, right? Honduras and El Salvador in particular have two of the highest femicide rates in the entire world. And domestic violence rates are documented at over 50% in some of these areas, especially in Central America. And previously, domestic violence was part of credible fear for migrants who were seeking asylum in the United States. And that is no longer the case. Women are not receiving asylum simply for fearing violence, domestic violence against them. And that's cis women, trans women, non-binary people, gender non-conforming people. That is similar. And so these feelings and minds and attitudes and behaviors, right, they all have real world impacts. And so one woman I want to tell you about in particular, I'm sure most of you have heard the name Malala Yousufzai. The amazing young woman who stood up to the Taliban and was shot advocating for education, and particularly education for girls and women. And her story has become internationally recognized, right? She has movies and books, and she's an amazing woman. And she knows also, just from what I can see in her speeches at the UN, she knows that she's not alone, and that her philosophy is one that that didn't start with her, right? But I would say that she has been tokenized as one individual who is fighting for the rights of women and girls to have equal and equitable access to education. And I'm sure that most of you probably don't know the name Nicole Soad Ham Bustillo. Nicole was a 13-year-old girl in Honduras, and she went on the local television station on the news, saying that she could not learn in her school without having chairs and desks. Simply just chairs and desks and blackboards or dry erase boards or whatever, basic utensils for facilitating the educational process. And because of her outspokenness, she was murdered in El Salvador. And yet we haven't said her name, right? We haven't said her name. And that is all too common, right? We feel often pacified by finding an individual to be an ambassador or to represent an entire population, but we know that change won't happen until there's a critical mass of people who are able to access equity, right? We don't want the first woman in Congress, the first president. We want multiple right? Because we know that with only one person representing an entire population over more than half of the globe, right? We're not setting that person up to succeed. We're not creating a standard that people can have the support that they need to fight for their social justice causes and issues. And so I'll just leave that there, because I know that I could go on and on about different women who've made an impact, but who are often forgotten in fighting for the same struggles.
I had mentioned earlier Nadia Murad, who is from Iraq, the Yazidi young woman. She will be one of our featured peacemakers. I also want to lift up, I don't know if people heard the news last week. People may have been too zoned out by the holiday, but on July 4th, it was announced that the military and the civilian protesters in Sudan, who have been in conflict since there was a coup that ousted their dictator, the military has been in control and has been refusing to hand over control, but they finally came to an agreement. One of the women we're going to be lifting up is Shocky, who is a woman in Sudan who gained notoriety on a TV show where there was a cleric talking about I think they'd invited this cleric on to talk about violence against women, because he knew a lot about it, and he was talking about how, well, if they would dress more modestly, and I don't even think she was one of the actual intended speakers, but somehow she got the microphone and she just lit into him about how she should be able to wear whatever she wanted, and that isn't what causes assault. And she became very, very famous and got very, very harassed and ended up having to leave the country for a while. But then when this revolution started, this movement started up this spring, she is now back in Sudan and is part of that people's protest there in Sudan, trying to bring civilian rule. And so just the bravery, it's like we may think we're doing something awesome when we've got our sassy comeback to harassment, but I mean, these are people who literally could be killed for just standing up and saying things that ought to be obvious and clear and honored by everyone. Another woman we'll be lifting up is Jean Zaru, who is the leader of the Quaker community in Ramallah in Palestine. She's one of the only female religious leaders in Palestine, and she does amazing work. I would say most disciples who have been on any kind of alternative tour in Palestine have probably met Jean Zaru. I feel like one of the main things she does is receive people there at the Friend's house in Ramallah, and her witness is extensive and long.
Thank you. I love these stories, especially people who are at General Assembly will be able to find out more, but those who can't go, you're getting a little bit of the information here. Kristen, do you have any peacemakers you want to lift up?
Sure. One of the women that I've had the honor to work with is Senior Chief Teresa Kachinda-Moto from Malawi. And I really like her story because she did not intend to become an activist, and actually it was sort of it sort of came about accidentally. She was actually selected to be a chief because the perception was that she didn't have a lot of power. She was the youngest of several siblings and was living in a completely different community, and one day was basically just told, okay, we've picked you, you have to come home. And she did, and they sort of thought that she could just be a token place filler and somebody that would be easy to influence. And then when she returned to the community and learned how many girls were being forced into very, very early marriages at age 9, 10, 11, and some of them becoming pregnant and dying in childbirth, she said, enough is enough, and now I have the authority. And so she started annulling those marriages and kind of pulled together a lot of the community leaders to get those on board who were already willing and sort of bring others along through power of persuasion and power of just, I have the power and I'm going to do it. And it's really inspiring to me to see that she didn't want the job and actually nobody else wanted her to have the job or thought she could do anything. And then when she was given that power, she decided to do something with it. And so since then, she has annulled, I think, over 1,400 marriages, and has really got a lot of buy-in from the community to keep girls educated, keep them in school. And so I think this kind of falls under one of the things that maybe doesn't feel like it is the most violent act that a girl could be subjected to, but it falls certainly within that spectrum of things that affect women and girls globally. And so I love her story.
That's amazing. And it's a reminder, like, we can be called to be peacemaker through unusual circumstances at any moment. So everyone beware and say yes when the opportunity arises. Brian, what about you? Any particular stories about peacemakers come to mind?
Yeah, I'd love to share the story of Catherine Chand. Catherine is the co-founder of the Polaris Project, which is a leading organization here in the United States that's helping to combat human trafficking. They literally help to work from an individual level all the way up to a corporate level, so that folks can recognize the signs of human trafficking that often are happening all around them, and be able to be equipped in a way to respond, so that we have national and international hotel chains now that are trained through the Polaris Project, so that they can recognize the signs and the signals around and know this is the way that I am to respond. These are the people that we can call for direct intervention immediately. The other thing that the Polaris Project does, though, is that they have organized the National Human Trafficking Resource Hotline, which is literally a toll-free phone number that someone can call to say, something doesn't look right here. I don't know what to do. Can you help me? Can you equip me? Can you give me the local phone numbers that might make a difference, the ways that I can step in? And the reason that this is a personal story for me, a congregation that I used to serve back in Arizona partnered with several of the other DWM groups all throughout the Phoenix metro area, because there is a shelter that's there for women who have escaped and been saved from human trafficking, so that they can begin the healing process and begin the long journey back from lives that have been defined by physical and sexual violence. And so there were literally young women and girls there who could testify, this toll-free phone number and some random stranger who called it on my behalf saved me. It pulled me from that life and has brought me into a place where I can have a shot at health and wholeness, peace, to use our language, that I never thought was imaginable before. And Catherine Chand's leadership in helping get that organization off the ground and helping get it mobilized in so many ways and so many different facets, I think is an important story, as well as a wonderful resource for people to know about that they probably didn't know existed.
Thank you so much. And this is unplanned, spontaneous for me, but this brings like a full circle. So my New Testament research has actually been on enslavement in the New Testament, and I use Polaris Project a ton in my classrooms. So yeah, it's wonderful. So everyone Google it. They're great and wonderful resources. And if you're a wild woman of the West, if you're in one of our Western regions, I believe that we visited. Oh, Linda's correcting me, but I was thinking that we had visited that organization in Phoenix that you were speaking about, Brian, as our mission project. But Linda's telling me it might have been another one. But at any rate, we were involved with people who had been experienced trafficking, and primarily women, to did their laundry that day. We benefited from things like the Polaris Project. So yeah, peacemaking comes in many forms.
And can I just add to that, Katie? I think we have probably a lot of Disciples Women on this webinar right now. And one of the things that I'm especially proud of in this resolution is that when we got to the end and we're trying to come up with what is it people should do, we had multiple things within our church to point them toward. And the ministries of Disciples Women's Ministries is one of them. And I think that the seriousness and the persistence with which Disciples Women have stuck with that issue of human trafficking is a huge part of that. So yay, Disciples Women.
Yeah, and I'll email everyone else. I'll email everyone in a few days. We do have a Disciples Women course actually with DSF Discover on empowering women globally, and peacemaking is a part of that. So yeah, thank you everyone. These stories are just so amazing. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts about the breakfast at the General Assembly? I think the breakfast is sold out, so I hope you have your tickets already. But that there's going to be leading worship around the witness and example of women peacemakers, and if that could be adapted for use in local congregations. So even if you're not at GA, there's probably a lot of opportunities for you to remain connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to say that we've actually opened up a handful more tickets for the breakfast. So if you're on this call but haven't gotten the ticket to the breakfast yet, act quickly, and we hope to see you there with us. One of the things that we want to do with the Disciples Peace Fellowship Breakfast is it's Sunday morning. So it's going to be a worship service as well that's built in. And instead of having a guest speaker to come in and deliver a more traditional sermon style for the worship service that day, we want to have a faithful conversation. And we'll invite people around the very tables where they have gathered for a meal that morning to be able to reflect on what peacemaking looks like today, what it means to be a peacemaker, how we can be active together individually in congregations and regions and the general church. But because of the resolution that we have this year, the jumping off point for that is actually going to be some of the stories that you've just heard reflected here. We'll lift them up as a case study. Maybe it'll be a story that someone has heard for the very first time and will trigger for them, like we just saw happen, actually. Connections that we didn't even know existed. Maybe it will be a way for someone to hear a story that they want to bring back to their local congregation. Will be an opportunity for us to hear these stories and reflect on the ways that they tie in to our own personal lives, tie into our congregation, encourage us to stand up as champions for peace and justice in this world. So you're also going to see at the assembly posters that we have that detail some of these stories, that have very short descriptions on who these women are. They'll be at the breakfast as well, so that folks can see those, can begin to engage with those stories and recognize the ways that the Spirit might be moving and leading us to have our story be a part of that as well. So our hope after the breakfast is that we'll be able to put together the resources that we've used, the prayers, the introductions, the discussion starters, so that other folks will be able to have that same or a similar conversation in whatever their setting might be. Maybe it's something that you can translate into your traditional worship hour on a Sunday morning. Maybe it's something that a DWM group or a Bible study group would want to use to engage in a conversation. The other piece that comes out of this is that we're hoping that it really is a conversation that goes back and forth. So that as folks are sharing those stories, we'll have folks around the table who are taking notes, so that as those wonderful answers and reflections are coming back on what peacemaking really does look like today, we as the leadership at Disciples Peace Fellowship want to be able to capture those stories too, want to be able to find the ways that all of this is interrelated, and that we can continue to be in conversation and discernment together, and partnership, honestly. To take these stories and to continue moving forward with them on that path for peace and justice in this world.
Thank you. I just created an impromptu poll while you were speaking. You're all inspiring me and I'm taking notes. And so I just actually would love to know from people if you would like written material, like in the form of a course or resources for your own congregations, if that's something that that DSF and DSF Discover and DPF might be able to collaborate on. And this is, I have not gotten the go-ahead from any of these 4 people here on the panel to ask this, so I'm just doing it on my own. But yeah, so I've created that poll. If people can answer that, that would be fantastic. Yeah, so if you have more questions about the breakfast and the materials available, let us know. So we've kind of covered 2 ways so far about, oh, sorry, Rebecca.
Brian mentioned posters. Is now a moment to talk about posters?
Yes, thank you for reminding me.
We need your help. If you are going to General Assembly, we couldn't figure out how to feature these women beyond our breakfast in ways that we couldn't count on the convention center custodial staff taking away, because they didn't know if they were supposed to be there or not. So we are going to be doing a live display, and the way we're doing that is we are looking for 6 poster holders to be at the door, the entrances to the plenary hall before every session that happens in there. So that's before every business session and before every worship service. So it's a couple times a day, most days. And we will meet you there and give you a particular Women Peace Holders poster to hold up. So we have a link that Katie will share and she'll send out. It's up there already. We would love to have you sign up to do that. We're hoping to have at least 6 each time. So we need a lot of volunteers. So if you can pass the word around, like get 5 of your friends who are going to be at GA and take a shift together and promote those women peacemakers for us, that would be super helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. And I will send that out, but you can click on it right here. I put it in the chat box, and I kind of made a little post as an offer as well. It sounds like the easiest and most rewarding volunteering you can possibly sign up for at GA. So if you're going to be there, that'd be really
They're not
appreciated. And we'll have options for people who can't attend in person at GA too. So hold tight for all of that. Thank you. So we've talked about voting. We've talked about becoming educated. Let's talk about some like kind of brass tacks about actually like supporting women and supporting women peacemakers. How can we do that? And Kristen, can you lead us off?
Yes. There are a number of ways that you can do this. I think the first one, despite your call for brass tacks, I'm going to give a sort of less tangible example, which is really just believing women and listening to women. And I think something that we've seen in the last couple of years with the Me Too movement is kind of this growing consciousness of issues that affect women and how important and empowering it is to support people who are willing to share their stories. But I think, like the statistics that I mentioned at the beginning about women being part of the peacemaking process, I think is actual evidence that when you listen to what women have to say, that they not only are telling the truth, but they're giving you valuable solutions, that they know what works for them and they know what is right for their communities. And so despite how you might feel about our current political climate or at times what feels like lack of bipartisan agreement on issues, there actually are some really great tools and strategies that the US government has developed, some that are kind of focused on US foreign policy, and then some that the international community has really come together in the UN and other similar forums that are focused on women in the peacemaking process and women peacemakers and ways to build sustainable peace solutions and gender equality solutions in contexts where these issues are kind of the most extreme. And so again, I'll be happy to share resources on these, but I think one that I would really point to is the Women, Peace and Security strategy that is kind of a comprehensive look at both women in the peacemaking process and the issues that affect women and girls in conflict and unstable settings. And then just this year in the new Congress, there's been a lot of movement around violent extremism and issues that affect women and girls in those contexts. And so there are a lot of pieces of legislation at various stages that could use a lot of advocacy and support from people all over the United States that need to contact their lawmakers to get these passed. And so, again, I don't want to inundate you with just a lot of buzzwords and names about things, but I can send all of this in follow-up.
I think that was actually very brass tacks because the conversation kind of exploded in our chat box about it. And so that's actually very concrete. Those are very concrete things people can do in their board meetings and their everyday interactions is to listen and believe. So yeah, no, thank you. And I want to make sure that I got what you said correct. Women's peace insecurity strategy?
And security.
And security. I thought something didn't look right. I'm going to retype it. Okay. Women's peace and security project. Okay. Sorry if everyone heard my typing there. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so what are other concrete things that people can do? Do people have other suggestions from the panel or from the people who are watching? Feel free to type that into the chat box.
I know one of the things we also wanted to lift up is just the things that people can do to support women clergy. Some of us are women clergy and have managed with and without support. Certainly, if your church is in a hiring process, you need to do whatever you can to make sure that that search committee understands that they need to look at all candidates equally and fairly. One of the things I think that can be very instructive is if you have never had a female pastor before, hire an interim who's a woman, have some female preachers come for pulpit supply. One of the things that's always so interesting to me, I spent the first 10 years of my career in Alabama, and I met a lot of people there who had simply never seen a female pastor before. And once they'd seen it, it was like, oh, okay, well, that works just fine. I mean, they just couldn't visualize it. And so once you break that barrier, a lot of the resistance actually just kind of goes away, because people are at this point, they're used to having female doctors. They're used to having female lawyers. It's just they hadn't seen it. So somehow it hadn't seemed possible. So breaking down those kind of barriers, if you are a male pastor who has pastored a church that's never had a female pastor and you know you're going to be leaving sometime in the next 2 years, start doing pulpit swaps with female preachers to acclimate your congregation to what that looks like and sounds like and feels like. And not the same one all the time, because some people might not like that one and therefore they hate female clergy. So you kind of mix it up to avoid giving people excuses. But, it's also all the other stuff. Once you have a female pastor, are you letting your fellow church members get away with making comments about her hair and her neckline and her hemline and her shoes and whatever it is that people think it's their business to talk about, rather than the substance of her sermons and her leadership style? Are you making assumptions about, that she's going to not just do all the pastor's jobs, but the pastor's wife's jobs too? Or are you finding ways to fill in those gaps that you used to depend on the free labor of a different woman for? So there are a lot of different things. I think the other thing about that is making sure that your pastor has enough time to have time with peers for support. Sometimes congregations don't understand how important that is to sustainable ministry. So making sure that pastors have not just time off, but that you understand that part of their job is to participate in collegiality activities in ways that are life-giving. And again, just the language thing. I feel like when I was coming up, inclusive language was something we talked about, and then some portion of the church decided we'd fixed that, but huge portions of the church have still never had that conversation. And so I think some of us maybe got weary of talking about it, and we need to start having that conversation again. I'm still just kind of shocked when I hear somebody having a whole conversation about men and thinking they're talking about all of us, because that's not how most people hear that word anymore. And it shouldn't have been how we ever did. So it's a lot of the little stuff. Make sure you're paying your pastor appropriately. Do that for all your pastors, women and men, and everybody else. And again, I think the other thing about that in terms of language, think about how the little girls and little boys in your congregation are hearing the words you say. I have never served a church that sings the Gloria Patri, but my home congregation still does, and I can't do it when I go there because I don't want to sing glory to the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, because I can't not hear that from the perspective of a little girl who's like, okay, I guess I'll just go sit over here in the corner. It's important, we think, oh, well, kids take everything so literally. Yeah, they do, and they shape our world, and we have to take that seriously.
So I'm hearing a variety of things that seem like little things aren't really little, and they're things that everyone can do to support women and they all contribute to peacemaking, which is amazing. So we'll be giving you some more tools for that actually right now, which is we can all become peacemakers. So we've talked about voting, about education, about supporting, and now let's talk about becoming. And we'll just call on the panel. What are some ways that we can do that? What are ways that we can become peacemakers? And Brian, I believe you're starting us off with that.
Yeah, thank you. And especially watching the way the conversation in the chat box just exploded around women lifting up. Yes, I have a voice. Sometimes I'm the subject matter expert on something, and I'm in a conversation and I'm never invited to share that. And so to be able to name that is a reality and that is something that we seek to overcome. Despite the fact that the world might tell you that your voice does not matter. I hope that everyone who's on this call right now can hear that, yes, your experience, your blessing, your story matters. Your voice matters. And want to lift up for you another one of the stories we're sharing at General Assembly. It's about Wasma Frog, which some folks may be familiar with. She's a peacemaker in Afghanistan who... when she was sitting at the tables to engage in the conversation of peacemaking, anytime that she would lift up her voice and try to say something, someone, a man, would silence her by saying, "You weren't a part of the war, so why should you be a part of the peace? You weren't there on the battlefront fighting, so why should you be a part of the peacemaking now?" Which I just want to lift up, centralizes violence, actually. And seeks to define peace as the absence of violence instead of describing peace in what we would understand as a much more faithful way, as a way of blessing and a way of life. That peace isn't just an absence of violence, but is actually a fullness of life that we as Christians lift up as something that we know through Christ Jesus our Lord and a call and command of our gospel, that we can live faithfully into that. I lift up that story because one of the ways that we can be peacemakers is to bring that same resilience and spirit that Wasma brought as well. That each time someone tried to silence her, she not only would continue the conversation and would push even harder, she would start working with other folks to equip them and train them and prepare them to be able to share their experience as well, to be able to share their story. Recognizing that too many people have been silenced and pushed aside, and that one of the ways that we can be peacemakers is to share our story and to equip others to share theirs as well.
Thank you. What about the others on the panel?
I think it kind of goes with the last question and this question as well. We've talked a lot about women being involved in peacemaking and making sure and that women's presence simply and input increases the likelihood of that peacemaking being sustainable. But we haven't actually mentioned, I think, which is rare for all of us, that being involved in women's wealth creation. I'm an anti-capitalist. You may have your own opinions, but I do believe that because we live in capitalism, that we still need to find creative ways to create wealth for populations who've not traditionally have access to that, and that is very much women, right? Part of that is because of a legacy or history of inheritance, and others, and many other things, right? And because of slavery and indentured servitude and human trafficking, things that we've mentioned before. But as we participate in wealth creation for marginalized communities, particularly women and gender nonconforming folks, we also know that communities are exponentially enhanced by women having more access to capital resources. When women are entrepreneurs, their dollars stay within their community nearly 200% as much as if a man were to make that dollar, right? For 200% times as long, right? So that dollar circulating within a community to build up the community, because women, fortunately for the rest of the world, don't spend the large percentage of their money on themselves. They spend their money on their families and their communities. And one thing that we've all known for decades, whether or not we've been alive that long, we have known of the issue of sweatshops, and we have known of alternatives to sweatshops. Right? We've known of oiko credit. We've known of micro lending practices. We've known of authentic fair trade, small farmer, small artisan co-op practices that we can be supporting. And I understand as well that all of us have different access to capital, right? And some of us don't feel that we have the access to be able to support the things that we want to support with our dollars, but we do have voices, as has already been clearly identified, and we are in communities. And so if we are able to use our voices in our communities to make the organizations that we belong to, our churches, our workplaces, our schools, to get them to have purchasing policies that uplift authentic fair trade principles that uplift living wages, that uplift women's rights, that say no to child slavery, then we will make a greater impact. One of those is our interfaith partnership with the Coffee Project with Equal Exchange. When our churches are buying from small, often much more frequently women-owned cooperatives, they aren't just giving back to those small farmers and those rural campesinos, but they're also giving back to the general church as a whole, because that partnership with Equal Exchange also gives back to Week of Compassion and our disaster relief services. So that's one way. And I love, if I may also take another second, this conversation by Sandy and by Catherine that's happening on the sidebar over here. Self-care is tremendously important. I was recently at an amazing art gallery that showcased, or an art show that showcased 5 generations of women connected to the Ursuline Sisters in Cleveland. And one piece of that said, "Dear women of the world, the body of the world and the body of women are the same body. The fading of life from the earth body is the fading of life from yours. It is the fading of life from all the women you know, everyone. This is not fake news. I'm sorry." Another one of those pieces said, "Dear women of the world, your lungs are like an interior forest. The forests are like the lungs of the world. You breathe in as they exhale. You live because they breathe, and when they are gone, so are you. This is not fake news. I'm sorry." And so what I bring that up for is because we have created environmental refugees. And I apologize for my brutal language. If you need to step away, please feel free to do so. But we have, as a society, continually raped and executed and exploited women's bodies, all kinds of women's bodies. And we do the same to Mother Earth, to Pachamama, right? And so this idea that we got to get right with ourselves and have this and be careful about how we care for ourselves and for each other. And in doing so, we must elevate our ancestors and the indigenous and inherently often feminine ways of knowing that we've lost, or that we've lost time for, that we've been lacking in honoring, are the things that will help us, I think, bring about some sort of self-peace. And we cannot create peace in the world if we're not also creating it within ourselves. And that's not just on an individual level, that's also on an organizational level. If we are justice and peace-making organisms within our denomination and within our society, and we are not addressing the internalized oppressions of patriarchy, of white supremacy, of militarism, of colonialism, then we are perpetuating those systems as we try to make peace. And so that self-care is so important. And so I just want to say that if you haven't heard anything by Adrienne Maree Brown, you should go look her up. She's an amazing woman living in Detroit, talking about pleasure activism. And that has got me thinking in whole new ways about how to create peace in the world, and doing it simultaneously within myself.
Let me go ahead and ask the final question, because I think we've already tiptoed, or more than tiptoed, into that area. We can kind of combine all of these, which is the final way to promote peacemaking is to do it in our personal lives, to cultivate peace in our personal lives. So as we kind of round out, I think we can just open the floor to the entire panel on becoming peacemakers, on cultivating peace in our personal lives, and anything else that is unsaid right now, for as much as we can say in an hour training. So yeah, what else is there that we need to put on the table?
God, I'm so grateful, Chrissy, for everything you just said, and for that witness and testimony. Self-care is critical and crucial for a peacemaker. One of the other roles that I have with Disciples Peace Fellowship, one of my primary roles, is that I'm the facilitator for our Peace Intern Program. We have 3 young women this summer who are traveling all over the United States, going from church camp to church camp, spreading the good news of the gospel message of peace and justice. And I get to spend a week with them in training, getting them ready for what that experience is going to look like as much as we can, helping them to cultivate what their workshops are going to be, but also helping them to develop what their spiritual practices are going to be that'll lead them through the summer. It's a very busy summer. It's a very full time for them. And we recognize that if you are a peacemaker whose spiritual wells have run dry, it's going to be even harder for you to be able to work towards that peace. And so there were 2 examples that I just want to lift up very quickly, that are tools that we taught our peace interns this summer. That they could not only be things that they could apply in their own lives, spiritual disciplines that they could carry with them all summer, but also spiritual disciplines that they could teach and could share with others. And so the first one came to us from Randy Cuss, who helped lead an entire self-care afternoon with our interns. And he talked about the spiritual discipline of journaling every single day with one simple question in front of you. What are 3 things that I'm thankful for today? And said that sometimes it's going to come super easy. And oh my gosh, those 3 things are going to fill page after page after page in your journal. And other times it's going to be really, really hard. And it might just be that, there was ice in my ice water. But to be able to carve out that space, carve out that discipline to say, yeah, there was a blessing somewhere today. There was a place that God was at work in my life somewhere today, each and every day, to help fill that spiritual well just a little bit more with that consciousness. The second one is what we call the 4 things, which is a way of centering ourselves, particularly if we are in a conflicted situation, or honestly, if you might be entering into a conflicted situation. And so it is something that you can do either with a group or in your own life that begins, what are 4 things I can see? And you name them in your head. What are 4 things I can hear? And you name them silently. But what are 4 things that I can touch? And if it's appropriate, reach out and touch one of them right now. And then pause for just a second. What are 3 things that I can see? What are 3 things that I can hear? What are 3 things that I can touch? And as it's appropriate, reach out to one of those now. And you go all the way down. You do 2, you do 1. And for some folks, it becomes more and more specific each time. For other folks, it becomes the creative challenge of trying to find something different each time that you're going through. For others, they're able to focus down. It's a way of grounding ourselves, but also a way of realizing, especially in a conflicted situation where it feels like this is my whole world. This argument, this fight, this violence that is going on, to be able to recenter ourselves once more. There is more to this world. There is an abundance that comes from God's blessings if we take the time to be able to look, to listen, to touch, that God's peace breaks in to our world with glimpses. And to use that as a spiritual discipline and a personal prayer to help recenter us, and then hopefully to bring us back to the good work of justice and peacemaking.
On a completely different note, I just want to lift up 2 things. For me, I cannot be at peace if I am not residing in honesty. If there are things that I need to have said and I have not said them to whomever yet, sometimes that's not appropriate, and I just need to sit with it for a while and let it dissolve. But for me, peace requires honesty, and honesty requires courage. And so anything we can do to sustain or build up courage, I think, is really important. And a lot of that, I think honestly that courage comes out of humility, because fear is rooted in self-centeredness. And so if we can diminish our need to be and sustain ourselves, then we can grow our courage. So that's one thing. The other thing I think that's really important for me is to cultivate belief in the power of bearing witness. And what I mean by that is, when I look at the history of peace and the history of violence in the world, I am very aware that there are long periods of history when the most a particular person could do is notice the wrong that was all around them and continue to call it wrong. And I think that matters, that somebody's doing that. To me, as long as someone is continuing to say this is wrong, even if there is nothing else they can do to stop it, the thread of resistance is maintained. And I think there are a lot of different ways that we can bear witness. I was actually telling someone the other day, one of my spiritual practices at General Assembly over the years has been to go to the Global Ministries dinner. And the spiritual practice part of that is that a lot of times at the Global Ministries dinner, there is a long period of time of like 16,000 introductions of people bringing greetings that you may not be able to understand very well, and they're all very repetitive, but it is so important that we sit there and be delighted to receive those greetings. And I think that's really important. So stuff like that, but also when I read the news, I happen to have a local newspaper that has pretty good international coverage. And, you know, it's like there's the things that are in everybody's news feed. But like I said earlier about Sudan, my guess is most people may not have heard about that. And so one of the things I sometimes like to do on the days when I have time is to lift up those international peace stories or violence stories, just to bear witness to what people in other places are going through. Because I know there are a lot of people in my congregation who simply don't follow the news. You know, I have over half clergy probably in my Facebook feed, so I'm getting a lot of it, but they're getting a bunch of memes about coffee. And so I I may be the only person who is saying, this is happening, we need to care. And so anything we can do to bear witness and to lift up the stories of people in other places that folks may not otherwise consider thinking about, I think is an important practice. And believing that that matters is sustaining for me.
Thank you. Kristen, what about you? Anything particular coming to mind to share with the group?
I don't think I have anything to add that hasn't already been said. I think my wonderful colleagues have already lifted up the things that I would have said.
I love it. So everything, then we'll put it under the basket of
Everything.
Oh, there was a question about coffee memes. Sandy, I think that what Rebecca was saying, Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, is that like some people's Facebook feeds is filled with like jokes, and you're attempting to.
That was a serious question.
Yeah.
I think Sandy's just giving me a hard time.
Oh, okay. Laughter is another way.
She actually did the refreshments. She said she wasn't very good at it somewhere in there, but she did the refreshments for our General Assembly information session yesterday, and she did a great job.
Oh, okay, this is a personal relationship joke. Got it. Oh, excuse me, everyone. I apologize. I've been coughing, hopefully mostly unmuted. I was at art camp last week, and I think I swallowed the mountain. Like all the dust on the mountain went into my lungs. So
it happens.
Self-care will be imminent tonight. So thank you so much to our panel. This has been so informative. I feel like we're all prepared for General Assembly. For those of us who aren't going, I feel like we're prepared to become peacemakers, to cultivate peace. I want to offer everyone the opportunity to sign up for the DPF Newsletter. So I'm going to publish that right now. When you click on this button, scroll down, and you'll see the sign up for, I think it says DPF Notes.
News notes.
News notes. Thank you. Yeah. Sign up for news notes, exclamation, a little black box with white lettering that says sign up here. That's the best way for us to communicate all of this information to you. You'll get it from, when appropriate, from DSF Discover, and then you can get directly from the horse's mouth with DPF all of the things that they have to offer. So go ahead and sign up for that now. We will be in touch with some follow-up information, with some resources I think Chrissy had mentioned, with future opportunities. When the resolution hopefully passes, which I'm sure that it will, we'll announce it with joy to all of you. And
holders.
What was that, Rebecca?
Sign up to hold a poster.
Yes, sign up to hold the posters. I'll be sure to send that information out tonight or in the morning. I know DSF Discover, we will have our own booth, number 318 at General Assembly. DPF, do you have a booth as well?
We have a very exciting booth. There will be t-shirts and flyers and interns and bracelet making and other cool things.
Awesome. So visit all of our booths. At my booth, you can get a free social media guide. So come by and drop by and get that. And yeah, we'll be sending out more information. Thank you. If everyone just will join me in thanking our panelists, taking time out of their busy schedules, their lives, their days off, they're at camp. They're really dedicated to being here. Just amazing. Thank you all. So I'll let you all chime in your welcome and your thanks to them. And it's been wonderful to share this space for the past about an hour and 15 minutes. So we did really well with time and conveying all this information.
Thank you so much, Katie. Thank you for organizing us and facilitating us, and for making all of these amazing educational opportunities and advocacy and activist opportunities available to our community.
Okay, well, yeah, it's my pleasure. I can't wait to see what is coming next. And so you're all receiving heaps of thanks and praise. And someone has a question. How long will people be holding the posters?
The shift is about an hour, because it's from like right before the doors open until about, I want to say, I have it until about 15 minutes after stuff begins. But if everybody's inside, and the stragglers will probably close up early. So
okay.
You are welcome, Sandy, to sit on a chair or a stool. We would be so happy to have you, whether you're standing, sitting, or laying down. As long as people can see the poster.
Awesome. That's great. All right, everyone. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and click end of recording, but we can stay on. It won't kick us off of the platform. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.